Donderdag 29 Februarie en dit is skrikkeljaar. Ek hoop jy het vandag jou kans gebruik om die man in jou lewe te vra om te trou vir die enkellopende dames daar buite. Ek lees vandag op Facebook, dit is iets wat sy oorsprong het blykbaar in Ierland. En dan ook dankie vir Leon Botha wat vandag kom groet het daar by die hoofkantoor in Skroderstraat in Abington, waarvanaf ek uitsaai op Radio Roepsyn elke dag tussen 9 en 11. Dis internetradio. As jy wil stroom, kan jy inskakel op Radio ZA of Radio Garden of MyTuner Radio en dan search jy vir Radio Roepsyn. Ek is weeksoggende 9 tot 11 op die lig en daar's ander omroepers ook die ander tye van die dag. Ons sluit af met Destiny. Chapter 18. Tom didn't run, not again. You may now kiss the bride. He only stopped once the whoops and hoots from the wedding guests became overwhelmingly loud. Tom relinquished his bride with a flourished bow, and at his side Leslie Ann curtsied, much of the delight of everyone present. Leslie Ann was public property. After her ordeal as a SWAPO captive and her celebrated release, her marriage captured the imagination of the whole nation. And when the press learned that she was getting married to Rekkie Tom McLachlan and that he, in fact, was her savior, the stage was set for one of the biggest and most celebrated weddings of the decade. And the bride didn't disappoint them. Dressed in a stunning white wedding gown, she came down the aisle on the arm of her father, accompanied by her 4 bridesmaids, and Tom's heart had swollen with pride and love. He had never seen her so beautiful, so radiantly happy, her eyes locked with his. He had taken her hand, and together they faced the padre, who was under strict orders to keep it short. Husband and wife, it was done. He felt a huge relief, saw his friends and former colleagues among the guests. It was the same church, the one from which he ran when he had learned that Leslie Ann was captured. And while he was waiting for his bride to appear, Snakes and Ben had jokingly manned a door, each to prevent a second escape. Miss McLachlan, I think we should not keep our friends and fans waiting much longer. South Africa is waiting. With you, I am up to anything, even the worst critics. Leslie Ann smiled at him, and together they exited the church. The crowd roared in approval and showered the new couple with confetti and rosebuds. The reception was held at McLachlan Wineries. Workers had cleared the one cellar weeks in advance, and Tom's mother and Joey Roberts had transformed it into a breathtaking reception area. The guests oohed and awed as they entered this and stared at the beautiful decorations. 3 months previously, Tom had taken over the management of the farm. As the sole inheritor of Barry McLachlan, Tom's mother had consulted with Tom and persuaded him to take over all the farming activities at McLachlan Wineries. They had built a new house for her to move to, less extravagant than the original homestead, which Tom and his new bride would occupy after the wedding. In the one corner, a band played, and on the other side was a well-stocked bar. Of course, the wine was on the house, wine from his wineries. Tom had arranged that his former colleagues were seated together, and whenever the opportunity was there, he would make his way over to them. Tom, Ben shouted on occasion, "This is the best damn wine I have tasted in a long, long time." "Agreed," replied John van Zyl and his wife next to him. "Cheers, cheers. Gesondheid. For he is a jolly good fellow," Snakes led from the far side. Tom knew that by night's end there would be more than few suffering from severe headaches. The evening was a huge success, the beginning of their marriage. With most of the guests gone and his Rekkie colleagues still boisterously singing, Tom and Leslie Ann bade the family a good night and slipped through the rear doors of the cellars to where Tom had hid his Alfa Romeo. It was packed and ready to go. They didn't travel far though. Tom had booked a lovely room at the Devon Valley Inn. The owner, a family friend who also attended the ceremony. After a glass of sparkling wine, they embraced and undressed. And Tom made love to Leslie Ann for the first time. The next morning, they departed on their honeymoon to France. They went to stay in Bordeaux, where Tom planned to visit several wineries during their stay. 21 March 1990, Independence Day. The new independent Republic of Namibia was born, and the proceedings were covered by all major international broadcasting corporations and watched by many worldwide. In South Africa, the official ceremony was followed with mixed feelings. For so many years, the South African had sacrificed their lives to fight a war on the Namibian and Angolan border, to keep the fighting away from the borders of South Africa, to keep the Russian bear at bay. Blood of hundreds of young South African 18-year-olds were spilled on the white sands of Ovambo and Angola. A war which South Africa, despite the misgivings of any, had actually won. But in the end, politics won. In their house, Tom and Leslie Ann McLaughlin were following the television broadcast. Tom felt a bit morose and downhearted as he remembered his fallen comrades while Leslie Ann was battling her own emotions. Together they had sacrificed a lot, yet time brought healing and acceptance. The Master of Ceremonies was announcing the names of the recent appointed Namibian government, and as the individuals' names was called, he or she would ascend the steps and took up position behind the newly elected president, Sam Nujoma. Timothy Shokongo as Deputy Minister of Defence, the MC announced. Tom sat forward and Leslie Ann gripped his hand. Together, they watched. Timothy Shokongo approached the stage with a limp. The cameras zoomed in on his face and Tom saw the pride and satisfaction on his face, the thin but friendly smile. He made it, Tom whispered with audible delight. He really made it. And there is Gina, exclaimed Leslie Ann. Oh, look at how lovely she is. His wife? She nodded. Only now do I realize that I have actually missed her. She was always so kind to me. She is Cuban, you know. So many times we had combated each other, pitting all our wits. He could have killed me, and I let him live, he whispered. She glanced at him, noticed the teardrop that actually rolled down his cheek. She pressed his hand and snuggled closer. I am glad you did, and I am glad the war is over. At that moment, a furious cry came from the adjoining room. Oh my! Leslie Ann jumped to her feet. Little Jimmy is hungry. Tom was stunned to receive a large order for his prize-winning Cabernet Sauvignon from Windhoek a month later. It was a government order. The order was authorized by Deputy Minister Timothy Shikongo. He showed it to Leslie Ann. Your destinies are truly linked, she replied. Tom said nothing, remembering vividly their last encounter and the expected relief when he learned that Mamba had survived their final encounter at Kasinga. Chapter 19, October 1996. Hippo Island, Katimamulelo. Tom stood on the banks of the Zambezi River, shading the sun from his eyes. It was warm and he could feel the sweat running down his spine, but his attention was focused on the wide-running river. A barge with a crane was anchored 25 meters from the riverbank. Cables from the crane disappeared into the dark waters, stretching, straining. Bubbles breaking the surface betrayed the presence of divers below. Could it be? Could it really be true after all these years? Tom and Leslie Ann were met at Mupacha Airport by the Deputy Minister of Defence of Namibia, Timothy Shikongu, and his elegant wife, Gina. The meeting between the two men was cordial and polite, but there was no hesitation between the women. They flew into each other's embrace, and there were a lot of tears and talking. Only later, and much to his surprise, would Tom learn that Leslie Ann and Gina had been corresponding by email over the last year. They had stopped at the luxurious lodge at Hippo Island, where they had been booked as guests of the minister. Only after the late breakfast and a strong cup of coffee, they had sauntered out on the deck. "I think we have found the wreck of the King Air," he had told Tom in a neutral voice. "I believe that your last mission was the same as mine, to stop the traitors fleeing with the diamonds, or fleeing rather with the diamonds." Tom didn't reply, only glanced at the minister, allowing him to elaborate. "Low-profile investigation over the years have confirmed that something might have gone wrong, that the flight did not reach Zimbabwe. Neither one of those who were supposedly on board, nor the diamonds, ever surfaced. Such a large consignment of diamonds entering the world market would have alarmed De Beers, but there was none. And you suspect, sir, that this wreck might be it? I hope so, and for the very reason I wanted you present. Your knowledge of the flight may be vital to the identification process." And now they were standing together on the riverbank, watching the Namibian police in the water. At their rear were several military vehicles, the soldiers waiting for further instructions. Without thinking, Tom took the packet of camels from his pocket and offered one to the minister. "You remember the last time?" asked Timothy Shikongu as he lit the cigarette. "At Kasinga?" "I do," Tom replied and grinned. "Never thought we would ever smoke together again, Mamba." "Neither did I, Tango Mike." "You did well," Tom said after a while, "to become a minister." Mamba shrugged. Only doing the best I can for our young democracy. But Gina said it's my destiny." "Kids?" Tom asked, and the minister nodded. "2 boys, real terrorists." "Mine too. We have 3, a boy and 2 girls, also terrorists." And then they were laughing. First a soft chuckle, and then louder and louder. Even the soldiers, a respectful distance away, stared at them in surprise. "Terrorists," and they burst out laughing again. Together the two men stood on the riverbank, enemies, opponents, opposites, yet brought together by the communality which they shared. They were soldiers. One of the divers surfaced, signaled at the crane operator, who engaged a gear. Slowly the drums began to roll, lifting the heavy object from the river bottom where it had rested for the past 10 years. The operator stared at the minister, who confirmed the action with a nod and a wave. "How did you find it?" Tom asked. "A year ago the river was very low due to drought in Angola. A tour operator noticed what resembles the remains of a plane. He reported it to the police, and somehow it landed on my desk." The seniors remembered the stories from the old days of the lost diamonds from Kasinga, so I had to investigate. Still, it took me a couple of months to arrange the salvage. "You think the cargo is still on board?" Mamba shrugged. "Who knows? We do not even know if it is in fact the same plane." Together they stood watching as the body of the aircraft appeared below the surface, broke the surface. The operator reduced speed and lifted it to just above the surface. Water streamed from the wreckage that was covered in river grass and traces of moss. The wings were gone and the tail was snapped in half. The fuselage was, however, incredibly intact. None of the windows were broken except for the starboard side cockpit window, which had a spider web crack. The registration number was barely visible, but it read clearly. It was the missing King Air. "It is the plane," Tom remarked. There was a note in the fuel log in Rundu that the registration number had been changed. Just before takeoff, the wreckage was carefully maneuvered onto the barge and secured. After another 30 minutes, the barge had been brought close to the riverbank. The crane lifted the wreck again and the arm swung out and over the parked low-bed truck. 15 minutes later, the wreckage was firmly lowered and secured, ready for the long haul to Windhoek, where it would be checked by the country's best forensic teams. Mamba and Tango Mike climbed on the low bed. Tom noticed the bullet holes and stitched the side of the plane. Tom noticed the bullet holes that stitched the side of the plane. "You?" he asked. Mamba nodded. "I emptied the PKM into it as it flew past. I wanted to bring it down." "Well, that did go down eventually. You did some damage." With the help of a crowbar, they succeeded in opening the rear door, which was slightly bent and quite sticky, but after a few minutes, they had opened it large enough. Three of the crates had broken upon impact, and the inside of the plane was littered with diamonds, which reflected almost cheerful in the late morning sun. Little were left of the occupants except scattered bones. Tom saw the bullet hole through the skull closest to the door. "Headshot," he commented dryly. "Not a bad shot," Mamba grinned. A little consolation after all these years. "What are you going to do about General Bomba?" Tom asked. "I mean, after all, he is one of your war heroes." "Well, keep it that way. No use to change it. This discovery is not going to be made public. A few of us will know that he was a traitor, but for the sake of peace, no one else would know. His bones will be laid to rest in the hero's acre. And the rest? Sent back to South Africa. Remains recovered after the war. No one will be wiser." Together they walked back to where the women were waiting on the sun deck at the lodge. Leslie Ann and Gina were seated at a table, but hardly noticed the men. "South Africa is beautiful. You will love it," Leslie Ann told Gina. "I hope to see you in Stellenbosch soon." "Oh, there is so much I would like to go and show you." It was only after they had ordered a Windhoek lager each, staring over the water, that Mamba cleared his throat. "You do realize, Tango Mike, that the diamonds belong to the Republic of Namibia?" "I can do nothing about it." Tom nodded. "I would not expect otherwise. But what I can do for you is this," Timothy Shikongu said. "The government is going to release land next to the Orange River for development, formerly part of the diamond concession area of De Beers. We want to establish grape and wine farms along the river. We shall need expertise from men like you." "I will drink to that," Tom replied, and lifted his beer in a salute. "Will you be interested?" "It sounds good," Tom said with a smile. "Of course I'm interested." "Then I shall drink to that," and Timothy lifted his glass. They drank in silence. Tom offered him a cigarette. The minister smiled as he took one. On Tango Mike, he grinned. On Mamba. The end. Okay, dit was nou die eerste Engelse boekvoorlesing wat ek gedoen het. Dit is nogals redelike inspanning, maar ek glo dit het goed gegaan. Nou is daar The Long Lost Grave, wat Wynand geskryf het terwyl hy in die gevangenis was. En dit is ook 'n baie goeie storie, maar ek gaan eers maandag met dit begin. So tot en met dan, lekker aand en geniet jou naweek.